Welcome to the Explorers Podcast with Ken Bowen. Here, Ken connects with friends and peers to discuss issues in the world and practices to improve one's biblical perspective.
Hi, this is Ken Bowen. I want to welcome you to the Explorers Podcast, and I'm here with my dear friend Jim Taylor, who has been a friend of mine for now how many years? How far back do we go, Mike?
I'd say it's about 7 or 8 years.
Something like that,
time.
yeah. And I remember the first time we met and had these encounters there in, out there in California. And
yeah, we hit it off right away. We just had great conversations.
Yeah, it was a really...
And continue to do so since then.
It has been, yeah. And really part of our history has been doing a lot of meetings together and really assembling a kind of a book idea about the uniqueness of Christianity as an apologetic for its reality, because it's something that no one ever could have made up or ever did. It's just astonishingly unique. And given that, it provides for us, the more and more, in fact, Jim, that I see it, the more astonished I am at the utter uniqueness. I speak about, for example, the 4 words of God, and those 4 words of God, how you have, as I put it here, the inspired word reveals something you could have never known, that the infinite word who spoke matter, energy, space, and time into being is in fact became the incarnate word. And that transcendent dynamic, where it's immanent and transcendent at the same time, has become one of the and then moreover to become the indwelling word. So that concept is extremely rich and profound to me. So,
and you don't find that in any other religious tradition.
No, you don't.
And this uniqueness or distinctiveness really is a pointer to the reality.
It's a pointer
to the truth of the gospel.
Yes, It's a pointer to the gospel, because it seems to me that you're dealing with a profound mystery of grace, the idea of God being 3 in 1, a community of being. We've talked about all these components together, you and I, the triunity of God, which is the only ontological basis for relationships. And I'm more and more impressed with that idea that people's alternative is some kind of almost like an absorption or an annihilation.
Yeah. Whereas in the case of the Christian doctrine of the Trinity, you have an eternal loving community responsible for creating everything, including us, in the image of that triune God, and inviting us into that eternal loving community to partake in it, participate.
Which is an incredible thought, because otherwise, if it was some version of atheism, materialism, physicalism, all you have is just our lives in this world is just an episode between 2 oblivions. Just a little.
Yeah, and even in other religious traditions, pantheistic ones or monistic ones, where all of us end up being just continuous with or one with the divine. There's no otherness. There's no separation to make genuinely loving relationships possible.
No, it's intriguing, but I was just talking and ran into a person who wants to plump for pantheism or panentheism because it's so much more cool to him. And it just seems so inviting. But if you really press hard at that, to be absorbed in as an ocean in the cosmic, a drop in the cosmic ocean, there's no I thou in there.
And it doesn't really satisfy the deepest longings of the human heart, which is to maintain one's own separate distinctiveness and individuality, but to be united in community for an eternal loving community.
Yes. So there's an I and a thou, and there is this whole idea of going from one extreme on the Western side, which is an individualism. The other side is a kind of a communal or collectivism. And to me, the communion of being is best in both sides. It's not an independence or a codependence, but it's an interdependence.
Yes, wonderful way to put it. Yeah.
And we know relationships matter most. I mean, even the atheist knows that at the end of the day, the most important thing about his life was relationships.
That's what everybody ends up saying, apparently, at the end of life. The looking back, I wish I had, and you fill in with spend more time with loved
Yes.
ones.
It was like that EMT physician who would actually go to sites of crashes, and he would realize quickly if a person is suffering from what he called sudden doom. And sudden doom is when they had less than 5 minutes to live. We talked, I think, about this, didn't we, Jim, at one point?
I don't remember that. Ken, go ahead and tell me
It
about
was
it.
an interesting experience that he had, because in that sudden doom, he realized that you had this whole realm of of death that's before you. It's this whole idea. I'm looking it up to see if I can find it for you here. Otherwise, I'll just quote it from what I recall. The idea was that at first, when people in this condition, he knew that he'd seen it before. He knew they were going to die in 5 minutes, and they would ask him, "Well, am I dying?" And at first, he lied to them and didn't say that you're not dying. You'll be okay. But then he realized, why am I doing that? I'm depriving him of this last opportunity. So he said, "Yes, you are." And three responses emerged from that, which were most fascinating to me. Um, it was, and his name was Matthew O'Reilly. He was an EMT paramedic. And so he realized that imminent death, three needs came out. As soon as he started saying, "Yes, you are dying," they either spoke about the need for forgiveness, and now they had their clock was stopped. But forgiveness. The second need was for remembrance, and the third need was the need for meaning. And it's intriguing to me because they correspond to needs for security, significance, and satisfaction. And at the end of the day, it came down to relationships one way or another, which to me is pretty fascinating.
To be forgiven by others, to be remembered by others, and also to have made think of oneself as having made a significant contribution to others.
Some kind of a meaning. One of the films I like to sometimes allude to is The Seventh Seal by Ingmar Bergman, and in that film, it's a crusader, a knight coming back from the Crusades, and on his return home, he plays a game of chess with death, and is buying time to do something that make my life meaningful. And it's an interesting and wonderful thing in the film where he actually does a thing that's meaningful before he dies. And so the idea of, can my life have mattered? But it has to do with an I and a thou if it's going to have meaning.
Yes, indeed. And I think you, in terms of things that point to the truth or reality of the Christian worldview, I think you also mentioned those transcendentals.
Yes.
That
yes. And I'd like us to chat about. I'd like to run some new thinking I've got on these transcendentals to try out my heresies on you, and so to see if my metaphysical heresies are.
You want me to put on my heresy hunter hat for this
Yes,
conversation?
we're going to have an inquisition here. So.
I'll do my best.
And so I argue that beauty, truth, and goodness. Beauty connects mystery with truth and goodness, and so I have an image of these. Remember the patches of godlight in the woods of our experience, and these three things that are patches of godlight seem to me to be those images of intimacy, beauty, and adventure. But at the end, beauty seems to connect goodness with truth, and so I've kind of changed my list in the sequence. I used to have a truth, goodness, and beauty, but now I start with beauty and go to truth and goodness. And I'll explain why I do that, and I want to get your take on this. It'd be very helpful for me. So I put them in that sequence, and kalos, logos, ethos. We understand those words that are the whole idea of ethos, ethical, and so forth, and logos. But the fact that God is the wellspring of all beauty means that we who bear his image are aesthetic beings. Because he is the fountainhead of truth, we who bear his image are rational beings. And because he is the source of goodness, we as his image bearers are moral beings. And so I find that to be fascinating. But here's what I was doing. I was relating the Holy Spirit to beauty. Not that I believe that all three members of the Trinity are involved in all three of these transcendentals. But it struck me that the particular emphasis on beauty is the way God approaches us in the world of his general revelation. And so in his general revelation, though fallen, the world is rich in beauty in the microcosm, midicosm, and macrocosm. And I relate that to the work of the Spirit of God who points, and so the beauty of the world points to the truth of the Word. It's the back door of the Bible. And then the Son always then points to the Father. So that sequence, it seems to me, and I'd like to get your thought on this portion, first of all, if that makes sense to you. Because it's always been so that in the divine Trinity, there is the ultimate basis for equality as well as authority. Because they're all fully, each is fully God. They're not each other. And yet it is the Spirit who always points not to himself, but to the Son. And the Son who does not point to himself, but always to the Father. And so it is, so it seems to me, that's the reason why I put them in this sequence.
You know, it's I like the fact that you're starting with beauty, and Plato recognized beauty as a draw to the transcendent, and that comes out especially in the Socratic dialogue, the Symposium, and how they, Socrates and his buddies are having a drinking party, and they're talking philosophy, and they start talking about beauty or love, actually. And being drawn by Eros love, actually, to beautiful things. Yeah. And at the end of the conversation, they've climbed the ladder of love to things that are even more beautiful until they reach beauty itself, the eternal source of all beauty. And of course, from a Christian standpoint, we can think of that as being God.
Yes.
Ultimately.
Yes. Yes, and there's a sort of a parallel with Dante, isn't there, at the end as well? And so the idea of Beatrice being the agency that, and then it is John then who is kind of leads him in from there. But at any rate, the idea of beauty, and isn't it Aristotle who tells us that that beauty, that evil is a kind of an ontological parasite?
Yeah, that actually is comes out of Plato, and then I think Aristotle echoes that, and then Augustine.
Augustine picks up on that.
Yeah, that the only kind of evil we have is goodness, something that's already good that's been damaged or corrupted or diminished in some way. So there's no such thing as absolute evil. In and of itself, there's only damaged goods.
Is it as Dante put it in this way? It's distorted goods and disordered loves.
Exactly. Yeah, and so that's the way Augustine thinks of sin, is improperly ordered or disordered loves. Everything we love in creation is a good thing, but sin comes about when we love things in the wrong way, and such as idolatry, loving something other than God, more than God, putting something else in God's place. That thing you're putting in God's place would be a good created thing, but if you love it more than God, then that's a disordered love.
Yes. And then the Screwtape Letters, remember how Lewis brilliantly says, our Father below can never create a real pleasure. Speaking of Satan, he can only imitate the pleasures that the enemy, God, makes, which I think, have the humans use them in the wrong way, the right amount, the wrong time, the wrong reasons.
Yes, and so genuine beauty is something that has its source in God, and that's why, whenever we encounter it, it's an opportunity to be directed in one's soul towards the divine, towards God. And towards, as you say, truth and ultimately goodness. Another thing I've heard, I read this in a book by Robert Barron, the Catholic bishop. Yes. I don't know where he got it, but it was the idea that there are two things that tend to draw people to God. One of them is beauty. The other one is suffering.
Yes. That's right. Is that his insight? Because that's a very good one, because it does inexorably draw people either away from or toward God at the end of the day, the suffering.
He might have given credit to somebody else, but I'll have to go back and check that reference. Said that he was at any rate the proximate source of my own
Yeah.
coming to think
Yeah.
about
I
that.
think that's an important insight, that the pain of this world, and yet another one of the unique biblical visions, or truths, is the idea of an actual fall, of a fall in space time history.
And I think of Pascal in his idea that even in a fallen world, even with sinful people, because our source was to be created in God's image, there's a kind of a dignity or royalty that shines through even the damaged goods of the human
Yes.
fallen sinful soul. So even in the midst of ugliness, the ugliness of sin, there's a hint of the beauty of the
Yes.
divine.
Yes. Um, because it's impossible to create just a pure evil. I mean, it's like the light being the absence of darkness, the absence of light, cold, the absence of heat. It's not a thing in itself. But so it struck me in my sequence, going back to what we were saying before, that there was a sequence, a procession, as it were, from the Spirit to the points to the Son to the Father, and in doing that. I also got to thinking about this next comparison of beauty, truth, and goodness as the Spirit, the Scriptures, and the sacraments, which struck me as, and those are the three things I'm looking for in a church. If I can find, it's rare. I think it's a very unstable compound to get all three in a church.
It's rare to find one local church that emphasizes
All
all three
three.
of those things to the same extent.
Yeah.
Yeah. And before we go on to that, another thing that occurred to me is that the order in which you had uh, beauty, truth, and goodness, Holy Spirit, Son, and Father, is of course the reverse of the ontological order of procession.
Yes.
And so, ontologically or metaphysically, in reality, it's the procession is from the Father to the Son to the Holy Spirit, or the Father and the Son, you know,
Yes.
giving the Spirit. And yet, in terms of human experience, it's the other way around, is what you're
Yes,
suggesting.
that's what I'm suggesting. It just as the structure here, because it's always been that the Spirit points to the Son, who always has pointed to the Father. So it's just a structure that made sense to me, and that in I have been in churches where I have seen all three of these: the Spirit, the Scriptures, and the sacraments. It's a pleasant thing, but it doesn't last long, it seems to me. But when it happens, I think it's a hint of better goods to come.
Yes, indeed, and at least we have churches where at least one of those things is present, but would be ideal
If
if
you
we
had
had
all
all
three of
three.
them,
And
yeah. And then
yeah,
what I did is I also was looking at the three major expressions of Christianity, and so I particularly associated Orthodoxy with beauty, Protestantism with truth, and Catholicism with goodness as a particular emphasis. What are your thoughts about that?
I think it makes a lot of sense. When you think about Orthodox history, tradition, worship, and the iconography, the smells and
Yeah.
bells in the
Hmm.
worship, it's highly um, formal, liturgical, ritualistic, and in very beautiful
Yes.
ways. With the incense and the bells
Yes.
ringing and the icon, so that all five senses are really activated in that kind of a worship
Yes, and
experience.
I'm a big believer in using the sensorium in active ways, and in having encounters with beauty. We're actually working on a project that could be an immersive encounter with beauty on the microcosm, midicosm, and macrocosm that would entail all five senses, even the use of haptic gloves. It's an interesting idea where you'd feel things through that, and the images as well, and the smells. Um, the more
Yeah.
you get immersed in that, the more you amplify the senses, the more you become conscious of the wonders that are available, and we can amplify those through technologies now in remarkable ways.
You definitely, but of course, you also, in addition to activating the senses, you need to activate the
That's right.
intellect, and that's where the word comes
That's
in.
right.
And of course, the Protestant tradition, more evangelical than sacramental,
Yes,
and so it's emphasizing
emphasizing the word.
uh, the,
Yeah.
the proclaimed word, the preached gospel, and even to the extent of that in some Protestant contexts, taking up the bulk of the worship service is the
Yeah,
message, the sermon.
that's correct. So the emphasis on a word-based understanding that it is, in fact, the um, revealed word, which is the general revelation of God's world. And then, as I say, the pointer beyond that, the world points beyond itself, and this can be a force multiplier for awe, for worship and wonder, if we have the eyes to see and the ears to hear. Because it seems to me that nature is sacramental insofar as that God has ordained everything in the created order to point beyond itself to moral and spiritual truth for those who have the eyes to see and the ears to hear. Does that make sense to you? That
It does, yeah, and yet, as you say, these different Christian traditions might emphasize one at the expense of
yeah,
another. So you've got Protestant traditions that have significantly downplayed the beauty
yes.
of and gotten rid of all of those extra things and focused just on the message.
Yes. I
And just the iconoclasm of the old days
yes.
when the
What
Protestants
happened with
were.
Oliver Cromwell and all the iconoclastic, the loss of all these, they would tear up these reredos and these altar screens and so forth. Lots of beauty was destroyed.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate and a kind of overreaction. Maybe there was an under emphasis in the Catholic tradition at that time on the preached word and on uh, the body of Christ having a direct access to the
Yeah.
scriptures is important. But there's a bit of tendency maybe to throw out the baby with the
Yeah.
bathwater in these
Yeah, it's
revolutions.
human nature. It seems to go from one extreme. You fall off the horse on the right side, you get up, and then you get back on. You fall off on the left side.
There you go. Yep.
It's the human condition. And so what I did from there then was to see if we could combine the best of all three. And then it related as well to the three needs for our time, it struck me, because Peggy Noonan's article on the amplification of everything is a wonderful exemplar of how we are reducing things to the lowest common denominator. But more now than ever, I think people need a sense of being immersed in the sublime, immersed in something ineffable.
And with all this uh, oh fixated attention on social media and little sound bites and word bites, I guess
Yeah,
you could call them, media
media
bites.
bites.
We're not able really to be immersed in an expansive beauty or a long narrative, uh, and to experience prolonged good relationship. So we're missing with this little fragmented social media context we're in, that we're enslaved to, really missing out on beauty, truth, and goodness in their
I think
fullness.
so, and actually, it's a movement away from the analog richness of the created order to the digital dimensions that reduce things down to, and just by virtue of the reductionism, the distortion of things. So
There you go.
such
Yeah.
that people on social media, what do they pose? They preen, they position, they posture, bumper to bumper relationships, as I call them. I got picked that up from Larry Crabb. Remember bumper cars?
Oh
I
yeah,
was a
sure.
very aggressive bumper car player, and because you just go right wham. But that's
Yeah.
relationships in this world. They have one bumper, and you don't touch the person. You just touch a buffer, and so you don't even. There's no connection.
Yeah, and as you say, it's motivated often by
Hmm.
self-assertion, and rather than a kind of humble openness and receptivity to the other, which is related to a word you use later in your charts here, attention.
Yes.
Uh, paying, not just thinking of other people as potential consumers of uh, my greatness.
In my greatness, yeah.
Right, that I'm curating online, but rather thinking of them as you know creatures made in God's image that are worthy of the fullness of our attention to understand who they are,
Yes.
not to create them in our image or use them for our
Yeah.
purposes, but to see them for the beauty Well, beauty, truth, and goodness in them as pointers to God, but also as creatures worthy of dignity and respect, with dignity and worthy of our respect and attention.
Yes. I think I've argued that attention is really a moral act. There's a dimension of what we attend to reveals much about ourselves, and so the. But it struck me that the need in our time more than ever is for a sense of encounter with the ineffable, the sublime, the beautiful, the awesome, the numinous, the transcendent, as a desirous thing, and that secondly, besides that corresponding to beauty, uh, to need for truth has to do with narrative, being immersed in a story that's going to begin well and will end well, so that we need a great story, bigger stories than what we are often given. And then the third need for goodness had to do with authenticity, where you're encountering a good person, and it's not just a buffered relationship, but rather there's an authentic connection with this person of goodness, where people want that. They want the real thing. They don't want just an image.
And of course, the Bible offers us all of these things. It's there's beauty in Scripture, but it is a grand story, and what it does is it leads us to an authentically good person.
Yes,
To
that's a great
Jesus.
summary. That's a great summary of that. So as I was considering that and realizing that, I then began to think about what are the three sources of beauty that are available. And it struck me that the first source is the world, and in God's revelation, in His revealed world, in His general revelation of the world. So the beauty of the world, and then the truth of the word struck me as a second source. So again, the beauty of the world is a back door to the truth of the word. And but then it struck me, and I'm running this by you, that the third component or source of beauty could be what we would call our response to the world and the word. And that response would be in the arts, in the sciences, and in worship. So I got to thinking about that idea, and it struck me as a need for those responses. And I think it makes sense to me, but
Hmm. Yeah, I think I see what you're getting at there. That in the arts we are representing, well, reacting to the beauty we see in God's creation around
yes,
us by engaging in the act of creation ourselves, as either a representation of what we see, or some kind of expression that's prompted by what we see.
yes, right,
Um,
and that
and then the sciences, of course, are a way to engage our own intellect to process the truth that we discover out
yes,
there. Uh, but of course, there's not just the truth that we discover as we encounter God's general revelation in the creation itself, but also the truth we encounter in His specially revealed
that's right.
scriptures, and of course, especially in the Word of God incarnate.
And that's when it works. So that's what inspires the best of the arts, the best of the sciences, the best of worship is our response to those sources that come from God Himself. And here's something
Yeah, go ahead.
that's new to me that I came up with, and I was wondering about again when we think about the patches of godlight. It struck me that there are three sources of these godlight in the woods of our experience that come through: beauty, intimacy, and adventure. Are these three things that, when I think of a great memory, it's often going to encompass elements from all three. And that made me think about how that corresponded to three sources of beauty. Here's what I mean: I mean that beauty, created beauty, a second form of beauty is communal beauty, and a third one is creative beauty. And so it's this creative beauty that, so we're exploring what that might look like with this thing with the Museum of Creative Beauty. But creative beauty is our response to the created beauty.
Mm. And interesting, you use the word adventure there, which makes me wonder whether the kind of creativity we could exercise in producing beauty could go beyond what we might typically call the arts.
Yes, I
Um,
think so.
and is to encompass more sorts of adventurous human activities. Of course, and there's maybe an extended sense in which that could be considered art, insofar as it's a product of human creativity to produce something meaningful.
Yes, that's exactly so. To as people who are called to be sub-creators or co-creators who take God's mysteries and then garden them and steward them and shape them into creative endeavors that would be, because for me, when I think of heaven as endless creative activity without frustration to the glory of God, I think of that as being not being, because most people's idea of rest and peace, recreate et pace. What are you doing today? I'm doing a little recreate. Just how about you? Rest. But there's got to be something more than that. Otherwise, it's like the Gary Larson cartoon when the guy's floating on his cloud and he's got his wings and all that nonsense, and then he says, "I wish I'd brought a magazine."
Yeah. Boy, that really sums
Does
it
it
up,
really?
doesn't
Yeah.
it? Yeah.
So
Uh,
then another dimension in this is the three sources or three definitions of beauty, and I tried to relate them to claritas or radiance, and then the truth component is the proportionality, and then the goodness component would be the wholeness, the shalom, and so that's wanted to get your thoughts on whether that seemed to have some resonance with you at all.
yeah, I think in terms of beauty, I think about the glory of God,
Mm-hmm.
and that we will participate
Mm-hmm.
in, and but that's also a result of our having lived our lives in a way that's consonant with or proportional to the truth of how things really
Yes.
are. Uh, and having done that, to live our lives in alignment with God, the truth of the gospel, we will progressively become more whole through the work of the Word and Spirit in our lives, as we freely open ourselves to that integration of our soul. And that's what it ends up producing, the beauty and the radiance of a human life that is aligned with the truth, and growing in goodness and
Yes.
holiness, really
Yes, that's
righteousness.
right. And
So they all kind of work
don't they?
together.
Yeah. And so when I think about integritas, the wholeness, I think that the word that comes to my mind is shalom again, and the whole idea of things, and they're working properly. There's a connectedness. There's a right order. There's a synthetic goodness. Of the totals are greater than the sum of the parts. Things are as they are meant to be. Remember? Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I was thinking of Augustine and the City of God, and his idea that peace is a result of everything being ordered properly in creation, and everything getting its due, so that peace also involves justice as well. But what you're saying about shalom is really, I think, what he's
I think
talking
so.
about
I
there.
think that's a component of that. Yes, the justice, the what that means, a wholeness where things are as they ought to be. And
Yes.
so then one final thought I had on this was the connection of beauty with loving well, which is the heart, and truth as learning well. That's pretty obvious. But then goodness of living well. So it struck me
Mm.
that there's a way of going from being and to knowing to doing, or inside out, heart, head, and hands, that related to the transcendentals as well. So I guess kind of these are just things I'm stringing together.
I think, and again, I don't know if the ordering matters as much here, but I think of learning that, the more we learn the truth that God's revealed to us in
Yes.
Scripture, then trust and obey and act on the basis of that truth, and do the will of God, um, we would become more and more Christ-like, and as a result, be more likely to engage in the kind of beautiful self-sacrificial acts of the sort that Jesus himself engaged in. And there's a real beauty when someone gives of themselves for the sake of another. Uh,
Yes. it goes back to that loss, and then there's the suffering again, as you were saying, the beauty and the suffering. Baron's idea there that you were referring to earlier. Um, those,
Yes, and then Christ on the cross. There's a sense in which it's horrible tragedy that the most innocent man and really, God incarnate has been put to death by willing humans, sinful humans. But his voluntarily taking that on is a beautiful thing. And so there's a kind of beauty that emerges from the suffering that
yes,
they kind of converge in a way at
that
that
is
point.
right. So this worst of human ills, of evils, revealed, created the conditions in which you have the full representation or manifestation of both the holiness of God on the one hand and the love of God on the other, and
Yeah.
how they both reveal that both sides of His attributes. It seems to me on that monumental moment, that eucatastrophe.
Hmm. Yeah, there's a good word for that, eucatastrophe.
Tolkien's concept of that. So these concepts just struck me as being very important for me to process, especially as I consider how we have our imaginations, and we imagination as an organ of meaning, and the idea of
Well, as usual, Ken, you've exercised your intellect and imagination in amazing ways, and ways that I think, are going to be very helpful for a lot of people in thinking through these really important ideas and then putting them into practice as well.
yeah, I do enjoy trying to see what's the takeaway for people, because application, I love to synthesize as a generalist. I synthesize, but I want to translate it without dumbing it down. But I want it to apply to the heart, the head, and the hands, and that's what I'm seeking to do.
Yeah, in our business, thinking a lot about things for the sake of helping others, it doesn't end up um, going where we want it to unless it really makes a difference in people's lives.
That's right. It comes down to what really matters at the end of the day, and what are the things that really count. And so, to me, it seems to me that these are pretty important fundamentals for us, recurring needs that are in the human condition that we need to have met.
And I see that you have a slide which indicates how each of these is represented in a different uh, part of your ministry.
Well, that's actually true. Yeah, yeah, yes, because
So that your endeavors are
yeah,
actually you're engaging in all of these things at one time in these different
yeah, the
areas.
Museum of Created Beauty corresponds to loving well. It's the beauty of the heart, and so the heart then points, and then the head with the learning well, the truth. Trinity House publishes the reflections of living well, good, yeah. So it is a component of that. I think that people long to have those fundamental needs provided for you. Um, I think I think about this a perspective as a pilgrim in this world. That I going back to suffering for just a moment. I know this relates to this. I've been chewing on this as well. Um, we've talked together about these things, but I came up with on a Friday morning in my study a pilgrim's perspective, in which a renovation, number one, renovation requires wreckage. We know that. Like, you go to somebody's kitchen and you say, "What's this mess here?" And you think that's the status quo. No, no, no. What's the worst? First thing we want to do is show you the blueprints. It's not as bad. This is what it's going to be. But you have to tear it down to bring. Well, isn't that a metaphor of our journey? And then
Mm.
secondly, God redeems what He allows, which has become, I have to say, increasingly meaningful to me as I see more and more of my loved ones diminish. And then
Mm.
third, we're
Mhm.
not defined by the pain of our bounded past, but by the joy of our unbounded future. And that the fourth one is the best is yet to come. And that's a philosophy of an overcomer, it seems to me. But it embraces the suffering, but goes beyond the suffering to the glory.
Mm. Yeah, and that's really the basis for Christian
Isn't
hope,
it?
isn't it? Yeah, and that's boy, how could we survive in this fallen world without that kind of uh, without that kind of hope that's grounded in God's fidelity and faithfulness.
Yes. Yeah. It's a faith founded on fact. But it still speaks to the deepest dimensions of the human psyche. It's one of the reasons why I love the Psalms so much, because, and they're set to music because they speak with the music and resonate with the deeper components that are below the waterline of our lives, and that they're roiling down there. And sometimes you get another insight from that, and it merges. But I find that great music and art can actually bring me down into a deeper level. It's why I think the Psalms were set to music for that reason.
And speaking of the Psalms, it might be interesting to go through them and look for the different ways in which each of the Psalms emphasizes or has a dimension of one or more of these transcendentals.
I like that.
That there's truth, goodness, and beauty
Yes,
in the
I
Psalms.
like that. Yeah, that would be a very creative exercise, I think, to do that, to see it in that way. Yeah, because there's a component of all three of those, and then the intimacy, adventure, and the beauty, intimacy, and adventure, those patches. So this has been helpful for me to process this with you.
Good conversation. Yeah. Thanks for the ideas. Thanks for inviting me to interact with you about them.
Yeah, we'll talk about other things. What I love about these things that we're engaged in, my friend, is that it's boundless. There's no limit. The sky's the limit.
And with our hope of heaven and the afterlife and heaven on earth, eventually we'll have plenty of time to continue the dialogue.
Plenty of time to continue it. And I will share one last thought that I've been chewing on a lot of late, and it has to do, as a scientist, with the idea of, for example, the natural order in the 1 Corinthians 15 idea, the resurrection. So when I was thinking about the eggs and with the butterfly and then the larval stage of the caterpillar, I recently found out that I realized that there are these instars in which there are multiple larval states in which they actually molt, and so there's much more complex than this. But then remember, in the pupal stage, they become a chrysalis, and that the caterpillar creates its own burial chamber and then dies, and then out of that goo, a new thing is born out of that same DNA that is radically different, and it's this butterfly that emerges. So what goes inside that chrysalis is a leaf-munching oddity, and what comes out of it is a nectar-drinking wonder. And then I realized, there's an analogy there for us, because I now see that the metaphor I'm using is informed by this natural world, I think, is that our bodies are to our resurrected bodies as the caterpillar is to the butterfly. And I've never seen a butterfly, but I know one. The firstborn from the dead. So, and then I see as well, I think we're living in a cosmic caterpillar world, and it's going to be so it'll be the same and different insofar as it'll be a butterfly, a caterpillar and a butterfly. But those are just thoughts for another time.
Well, that's a wonderful image of our future life together. Flying, beautiful, flying around.
Zooming down into orders of magnitude and zooming back out, where time and space become your friends. As Tozer puts it, time will no longer be an agent that carries its sons away, but rather be a pool in which we luxuriate, and where it'd be like a cat purring at our feet. I don't know what that means, but in an unfallen world, the resurrected cosmos, our experience of time and space will be doxological, and so not diminishing. Therefore, what about us going down together and zooms and orders of magnitude, zooming out and going elsewhere and so forth? And if it's not that, it'll be even better, because all I have is a caterpillar imagination.
So Psalm 90 doesn't have the last word of the human story with the saying that we fly away.
Yes.
Well, we fly away, but in the next life we'll be flying around.
Flying around, yeah.
And together.
Exploring and wonder and creating and doing marvels. So we have things to do, my friend, in the ages to come.
Thank you for being a part of the Explorers Podcast. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.